I warn people of making an exit your primary focus. I say your exit should be like a rearview mirror if you're driving, as you look up and you check on it. But the primary focus is where you're going. And in the exit, I've seen people do this about face, where all of a sudden it seems like greed takes over because you're looking at numbers that frankly can be life-changing and make you financially independent, and that's important, right? But if you make it the primary focus in your exit, it can really change a lot of your decisions and kill the deal.
Welcome to Endless Coffee Cup, a regular discussion of marketing news, culture, and media for our complex digital lifestyle. Join Matt Bailey as he engages in conversation to find insights beyond the latest headlines and deeper understanding for those involved in marketing. Grab a cup of coffee, have a seat, and thanks for joining.
Well, hello and welcome to another edition of the Endless Coffee Cup podcast. As always, I'm your host, Matt Bailey, and bringing you a deluge of interesting guests. And of course, I got my good friend Mike Stebbins back. I promised that we would come back and talk more about being a backward entrepreneur. Mike, and I've even got the notes in it. How are you doing today?
I'm caffeinated and happy, and I love seeing the bookmarks in there. That's almost the equivalent of, Matt, when you're doing one of your teaching sessions, teaching one of your classes, giving one of your talks, you see people pull out a notebook and start typing or writing things down. So couldn't make me happier. Also, the fact that the bookmarks matched the R in the color scheme,
That may have been subconscious because I don't remember even thinking about that. Because I do have a variety of colors, but this was, and I love marking up books. I have a hard time. I've got a great library of books that I've just accumulated over the years. And I always like to mark, highlight, make notes. And, just even today, someone's like, oh, could I borrow that? I'm like, no.
Yep.
That's my copy.
Matt, somebody once said that the material for a book should be, or could be, not should be, could be notes to yourself. In other words, if I was writing notes to myself about how to assess my own abilities for a business or to be an entrepreneur, how to validate my markets, how to structure the company, how to scale it, how to get customers, when to quit, these are my notes.
Right.
And what's really funny is, as in the pre-roll, you and I were chatting, I may pick up the book and look at it some of these times and look up, what did I say I was going to do?
What did I say about that?
Yeah, the human mind, at least my mind, doesn't hold all 10 chapters of information. And it's kind of like a Bible for, resource. Go back and look. And
Absolutely.
You get reminded of things that you've forgotten. So that's how I treat the book as I go through new ventures, or even when I'm sitting with clients who are going through an exit or trying to get customers. It looks bad. You could see him get a little nervous when I pick up the book and say, well, what did I say there? Through.
But I do that in training all the time too. I'll be putting together the course, and then all of a sudden I was like, wait a minute, I've talked about this before.
Yeah.
When did I talk about that? And now I go back into years of PowerPoints. And I was just telling my staff here, I'm like, they go back to like 06. They go back to 04, even some of them. And I'll find them like, oh, that was good. What? How did I forget that? You just, these notes to yourself that this is why I love digital is it's so easy to store. You can go back and find it. You could do a search. It's amazing how far you can go back and find things that you've said before.
Yep. So absolutely. I may pick up the book and say, what did we say there as we go through this?
Well, the reason why we're doing a part two is we talked a lot about the first part of the book in the first session that you and I had. But I think the second part here, I want to cover some of the final chapters because I think they are just as interesting. That the three areas that I want to cover with you today about your book. Number one, getting customers, because that is, everything else will fall apart if you don't do that. But then scaling, the questions to ask about scaling a business, and then also exiting. I meet a lot of people who their only mission in creating a business is to exit. And I think that's an interesting way to think when starting, but it is something that you have to keep in mind, but I don't think it should consume you when you're doing that.
your quote is perfectly aligned with what we say in chapter 1, which is why are you doing this? And then in the exiting chapter, we touch on that again, saying, I have seen clients do this weird turnaround, Matt, in the midst of an exit, in the midst of a deal, when they had started the business with the vision of making a difference with, paying themselves well or exiting as a secondary but important goal. That balance works really well for the long term. I warn people of making an exit your primary focus. I say your exit should be like a rearview mirror if you're driving, as you look up and you check on it, right? But the primary focus is where you're going. And in the exit, I've seen people do this about face, where all of a sudden it seems like greed takes over because you're looking at numbers that frankly can be life-changing and make you financially independent. And that's important, right? But if you make it the primary focus in your exit, it can really change a lot of your decisions and kill the deal. And I've seen it happen. Well, let me be accurate. I've seen it come very close to happening. And the people that I've worked with was able to have this conversation and steer it a little bit and say, hey, you let it go. And the reason I'm able to do that is that I had a business partner who was willing to say, Mike, let it go. Let it go. And it made all the difference. And so that's reflected in the chapter on exiting. But first, you're right. Let's talk about getting customers.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's interesting that you compared two different types of frameworks, the customer framework versus the entrepreneurial framework. I thought that was an interesting contrast as a way to introduce your methods of basically customer research. And you've got a nice list of things to go through. But let's start with that comparison of frameworks. What's the difference between a customer focused framework and an entrepreneur's framework?
Yeah, so entrepreneur-driven acquisition is where we define what we do and what we say by what we want to do, what we think customers want to hear, or the features of our product that we think are amazing. And frankly, that's the way a lot of people go. A lot of folks go by what I would call momentum. They look at things like slogans, repetition, and phrasing. They want to model their customer acquisition like BMW or Microsoft or something like that, right? Where I doubt if they have the resources ready to go to make that kind of repetition and slogan work. And Matt, you've seen this dozens of times. Somebody comes up with a great product and they're just convinced it's going to change the world. And then they say, I put out a sign and I put up a website and I wrote a blog post and I did 3 LinkedIn posts. Where are the customers? And that's usually where my engagement starts with clients. And I know in your case, you've seen the same thing. And it doesn't mean the product's bad. But what a lot of these folks don't know is that the customer will tell you in advance what they will buy and how to sell it to them. And we know that customers will buy, there's a chart in my classes where it has this graph where 2 lines intersect and we're very close all the way going up and to the right. And one of them says sales and one of them says trust. And I said, this is a highly scientific chart that shows the higher the trust, the higher the sales.
Right.
And our mutual colleague and my friend Rand Fishkin had posted something to the gist of, if you want people to buy stuff, don't sell it. You need to generously give information. I'm completely hacking his quote, but you need to generously give information so it builds trust and people buy from folks that they trust.
Absolutely. I'm going to jump in here because part of the trust and that entrepreneurial mindset, I'll never forget. I was talking to a potential client and her idea for the business, she says, I want everything to look like Oprah's. I love the Oprah vibe. I want my website to look like Oprah's. I want to put across that feeling. And it was kind of maybe snarky on my response, but I was like, that's awesome. I'm like, that's great. Do you have Oprah money? because it was more this is what I want to exude, this is what I want people to see, but it was all focused on her and her view of what her business would look like, and there was nothing about a customer.
Yeah.
And so, okay, you want to appear this way, I don't think you've got the money to do it.
Yeah.
There's a certain investment level there required.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Okay, so here's how it works. And customer-driven acquisition, or I'll say CDA sometimes, that means customer-driven acquisition. It's a process by which we define what we do, and what we do means our product or service, and what we say, which is how we try to persuade people to buy our product, is informed not by what we think is cool or the features that we built, but it's informed by what customers will buy, what customers are trying to do, and how customers describe what they want. And CDA is a methodology for extracting that. The simplest start to that is to answer this question. What do we need to say and do that will persuade the customer to do business with us and no one else? And then, can you say that about your product? Too often the answer is no, because we use the entrepreneur-driven method to build what we want or what we thought will change the world. You can have a product that has all the cool features and it doesn't fit what the customer needs in terms of a buying model, or maybe we're using the wrong words to convey it to them. So, by the way, there are other ways to derive, what your customers need. This is just the way that's worked for me, and it seems to work for clients, and I like sharing it with them. So we could try to derive what we do and what we say by simply asking customers, hey, what will you buy? Or what do we need to say to you in order to get you to buy it? And sometimes that's a hit. But too often people will answer those questions with what they think you want to hear, or what will just end the phone call quickly, or have the least amount of confrontation. Often when I teach CDA, the first thing I start with, Matt, is how I interview employees. And what I'll do is I'll ask an employee as part of the interview, and my staff will do the same. What are 3 things that would make you get up and leave a job? And the first 1 or 2, they're going to read off the card, right? Well, if there's unfair treatment of my coworkers, or if I'm suppressed somehow or oppressed, and those are typical, and I try not to roll my eyes when they answer because it's a genuine and valid answer.
They're out of the box answers, yeah.
Yep. When they get to the third one, usually you see the eyes drift up to the left, and now they're processing. Now they're thinking about a situation, and they're not as concerned about the answer that they're giving because they're drawing from scenes, right? And emotions. At some of the companies, one candidate said, if there was the smell of food in the office, I can't stand the smell of food. And I'm thinking to myself, you're not going to be happy here. Somebody burns popcorn an average of twice a day. Yeah.
Oh, no.
But what happened is the answer was honest. And so the customer-driven acquisition process helps phrase questions to derive the pillars underneath this pyramid. And Matt, I don't know, can you put images in the podcast video?
I tell you what, I can put them in the show page.
Okay, great.
So
I'm going to provide an image of the pyramid, but basically on top is what we do and what we say. And then underneath that is what customers will buy, what customers are trying to do, and how they describe what they want. And I got this 4 things underneath those, right, that allow us to do that. One is establishing validity of the market, but the other are deriving what we call scenes, wants, and knowledge. And scenes, wants, and knowledge, and we got to be careful about the detail on the podcast here, right? Because we're going way down a rabbit hole. The scenes are events or scenes where the customer first starts thinking about purchasing or acquiring what we do or what we sell. What is that scenario? And you remember from Market Motive, one of the scenes that we derived by using the question methodology that is part of CDA was that Thanksgiving was a time when people bought, and we found out why is that there was some family pressure at family get-togethers. It's like, why
Right.
can't you perform like your brother or your sister, or why don't you have a job like such and such?
Hmm.
And we learned that the scene was, frankly, it was a negative thing, but it was,
Right.
pressure from the family. Then we derive wants. So we do scenes, then we derive wants. And wants are when buying or using what we sell, what is the customer typically trying to achieve or avoid? And sadly, avoid is a stronger one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They want to avoid embarrassment or shame in front of the
Hmm.
family or something like that. Right. On a
Hmm.
positive, some people want to achieve financial independence or
Right.
the admiration of their family for being a provider. Right. And these were
Hmm.
some of the motivations that we learned. And then the last one is what we call knowledge. And the knowledge are what are the relevant and important issues that a buyer needs to be aware of when making a decision to buy something like what you sell.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily features, but what do they need to be aware of? And a great way to extract this, I'll give one example of how we have developed questions that extract this, is to say, imagine you are teaching your cousin or your sister or your mom, you choose somebody that the customer might care about.
Hmm.
Imagine you are teaching them how to make a decision on how to buy plumbing services or how to buy a garage door opener or something like that. You might tell them, make sure it has one of those safety eyes so when little Billy, walks in front of it, it doesn't close on little Billy, right? And now if you can get the customer to start picturing in their mind, right, how they would teach their mom or their cousin or their sister how to buy, let's just use a garage door opener, they're using the phrases and describing the knowledge for what somebody needs to know to buy the product. And that is what we use to come back and communicate to them and share information with them that's useful whether they buy our product or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like, well, what it does is it brings it to the level of feeling. And
Yep.
that's where we make those decisions rather than
Yep.
just this ascent of facts and figures, which I think people don't realize that is a part of the equation, but it's not fully. A couple of things that study of learning about those, our students at Market Motive was absolutely great, because I think our assumption was, January 1st, everyone's starting something new. I want to be better, but like you were saying, it was more of a negative motivator, that I don't want to show up to the next Thanksgiving and be compared to my brother or sister, or,
Yep.
you know,
Yep.
so there was a negative motivator.
Yeah.
And so you approach that completely different when there's a negative motivator rather than and I even look at, this is where I bring in Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This is such a deeper level of need. This gets to acceptance, social acceptance among the people closest to you,
Yeah.
which is much deeper than the what is it? It's achievement and
Yeah.
self-actualization, which was top of the pyramid.
Yes.
There's a miles of difference between that, and so the motivation is different. They want to change more things. Absolutely understanding that underlying motivation, because, and especially that the emotions will be deeper. They're going to be more motivated to finish because there's more at stake with what's happening. But I
You
love the
learn
yeah.
when you get the answers to these questions, there's a process that we teach that we learned is so valuable, and that's you get permission, of course, you record, you transcribe, and we color code the phrases that come in from the customer
Mhm.
in terms of scenes, wants, and knowledge. Okay. And the third step of CDA is to create what I call a persuasion bank.
Hmm.
And a persuasion bank is this beautiful thing that some people call it a headline bank, right? It's a bank of persuasive phrases that could be considered to be ad headlines or topics for blog posts or sharing or seminars or whatever. And they all contain what's called a trigger and an assurance.
Mm. Yeah.
Trigger and assurance, okay? The trigger combines a scene that's familiar or disturbing, okay? That triggers the beta or aware mode. And then it also contains a scene and a want. So a trigger, a scene that's important, like let's say, you have wedding planning services or something like that. Well, obviously the scene is we're planning our kid's wedding or something like that, or you're planning your own wedding. And a want is, I don't want my wedding to be an embarrassment to the family, right? I don't want to appear cheap, right?
Or I don't
Now
want to
the
spend
assurance is the second half.
20,000. I don't want to spend 30,000 or 20,000,
Exactly.
whatever
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
average cost of a
Yeah.
wedding is.
Well, the assurance is a combination of a want and knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I want a good looking wedding, but I don't want to have to pay more than I need to.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you have a combination of a want and a knowledge, that becomes an assurance. And when you have a combination of a scene and a want, that becomes a trigger. You combine those to make headlines that matter.
Mm-hmm.
And then your topics follow on using phrases that your customers use to describe what they want to achieve or what they want to avoid. And so here's this magical thing happens, Matt, when we go through a workshop and we practice on these interviews, what people have said, your eyes start to color code the phrases. And you start to see, oh, okay, there's a want to achieve, there's a want to avoid, there's a knowledge, there's a scene. And then we go through the process of putting these into a persuasion bank. And what you end up with is a universal messaging system that informs what you say and what you do for your product in your social media, in your podcasts, in your outbound, in your seminars, in your, what I call your generous output that helps you love your audience, helps you love your customers into trusting and buying your product should their needs align with it. So now you have a persuasion bank entry that your ads are now coordinated with your social, is now coordinated with your articles, is now coordinated with your audio output, your videos. Everything is themed beautifully to speak to what the customer has told you they need to know in order to do business with you and no one else.
That's great. I love that. I love that. I've seen you do it multiple times. I try to repeat it because I have learned from you on this, which is great. I mean, it's so good because I would say my basis in persuasion is a lot of the classical literature,
Yes.
Aristotle and things like that. So being able to take a lot of those, I've come out of we've talked about this, the logic, emotion, and credibility are the
Yes.
three elements of persuasion, and
Yeah.
and how you kind of reinterpret that to this modern digital sense. But it's just people are the same that they've always been. And I go back to, I think it was Aristotle, Pascal, it goes through philosophers all throughout history. People want to be happy.
Yeah.
And that's what you're doing with this assurance is you're making a good decision. It's okay. It's,
Yeah.
ultimately people make decisions based on that single premise.
Yeah, it's the promise of the ad. So let's go back to the wedding example. Here's your trigger. Luxury weddings on a shoestring. And now your assurance. How 4 couples did it?
Yep.
Okay. So right there, you have a theme or a headline that can work for all kinds of output.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me give you an example of where I did not do any of the customer-driven acquisition and it completely failed. Is that okay for the podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's.
All right.
I
So
mean,
here's
hey,
something silly.
people learn from failures. There's
Yeah,
theirs
and
and
it's like,
others. I'm convinced of that.
and this, and this is in the book, and it's like of all people who wouldn't do this, I did it. Right? I teach this stuff.
Right.
So
right.
how is it, Matt, that I created a product where I could not speak to the customer in a way that persuaded them to buy it?
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is that I never created this product to sell.
Oh, no.
I created a product to teach a lesson. I had somebody close in my family who I cared about who said patents are impossible to get.
Mm.
And I figuratively took them by the ear and led them out to my garage.
I remember this. I know.
And I said, we're going to invent something. And I was being very flippant, and this person was being very patient with me. And I duct taped a cranberry juice bottle to a stick, and I filled it with sand, and I said, "We have made a dead blow trash compactor." And this person was doing everything they could not to roll their eyes, and I chucked it down in the trash mat, and it compacted the trash to a pancake. And while we were kind of in this flippant, fun, silly mode, we both saw the trash compactor and looked at each other and went, we didn't expect that. So I knew a trash compactor was unlikely to be in the market. So I went through the process of getting a patent for a granular damping methodology in a impact tool. So basically those little tampers you use in your garden to tamp down soil, or landscapers use them. And it turns out it was amazing. It was amazing. Mm-hmm. It blew everybody's mind who played with it. I achieved the goal. We got the patent. The interns at the company got to see, conversations with the attorney. That was all fine. But now I got this product. I never did any market research. I never talked to customers. It was merely to teach, right? Mm-hmm. It was an object lesson, but everybody's like, "You're rich. You got a patent. It's amazing." And I let that influence me. Okay. And I thought, you know what? What's a few $1,000s to go to the National Hardware Show? I take the product to the National Hardware Show. I know what's going to happen. I don't know why I did this. I think I did it because it was fun. And Karen and I got to go to the hardware show and sit in the booth with a tangible product. This is fun, right? You got a big backdrop behind me, and talks about granular damping. I had the world's expert on granular damping, Dr. Philippe Vasquez, I believe, out of...
My goodness.
So, he validated this thing as superior. Somehow I got invited on stage with Home Depot. All the executives, they're not supposed to come around and touch the product, but somehow I got them to come up and try the thing out. The guy's eyes went huge, his jaw dropped. He's like, "This thing is vastly superior." And in front of the whole audience, I gave the guy a break. I said, "But you'll never put it on your shelves." And he goes, "You're right." Because that 1 foot by 1 foot section of shelf space is too expensive for a high-end product. It's too expensive to manufacture. They would much rather have a low-cost thing with a high margin that turns.
Yep.
And had I talked to my customers, and in this case, the customer would be Home Depot.
Right.
Had I talked to them in advance to find out what it is I need to do and say for them to buy my product instead of any others, they would have told me it needs to have this margin and this cost of manufacturing. And it would have never ended up being a product.
Yeah.
And it isn't. By the way, it's a great product, and there's a website, amtamp.com. You want to buy one? Let me know. I have 6 of them in my garage.
I've seen them come back from getting painted. They're sitting out there on your porch.
That's it. I know. Yeah. And they're great. As landscapers come by, I hand them to them. It's a superior thing in every way.
Yep.
But we've done none of the market research to validate what we need to say and do in order for people to buy it instead of any other.
Yeah. Well,
so, it's a perfect example of why superior products and even good marketing, as you and I defined in here with Greg and the rest of the awesome authors, Kim and Cindy, and of course, Brad, that's great marketing too. Great product, great marketing.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are not informing what you do and what you say by what the customers have told you, it's not going to work.
Yeah. So I'll let you know one of my failures as well. Very similar. So I was working for a software company, and they gave me the New York Times as a client. I'm the young guy, and they gave me the New York Times. So I'm trying to sell our software into, and this was pre-press software, and great connection with the decision maker there. We spent a lot of time together, a lot of time on the phone, and the demo went well. And we were a startup and in the industry and going against the big people, the big guys on there. And I remember I was in New York, we'd gone to lunch, and he's like, "Matt, you guys, you check all the boxes. You are the most logical choice. Love it. You'll hear from me in a week." And I tell this story. I'm like, I am on the plane ride home counting my commission. Like, yes, because this is going to be, it's not just going to go in the Times. It's going to go into all the remote printing areas. I mean, like, this is going to be phenomenal. A week goes by and I don't hear anything. Yeah. And after another week, I called and I said, "Hey, Hey, how are you? What's going
Yeah.
on? And he's like, Matt, I've been trying to think of a way to tell you. He says, but no one ever got fired for staying with IBM. And right again, the emotional distance between he made this decision at a security, like, if I go wrong with this, I could lose my job. If I lose my
Yeah.
job, I lose my house. It affects my family. That's the level at which he made his decision. Meanwhile, I'm selling up here, and I realized all the benefit statements that I gave were about the New York Times.
Yeah.
I sold no benefit to him personally
Yeah.
to make that decision.
Yeah.
And that changed how I sold from then on. That was just an amazing lesson in that assurance, as you were talking about. I was assuring the company, not him, and
Yeah.
he was the sole decision maker on that.
Yeah.
So yeah, the things we do in our younger days really kind of come back and
If
provide
we
good
can share
lessons.
those with others to their benefit, they can learn from our mistakes. So
Yeah, absolutely. But I love that framework of, very clearly setting those things out and analyzing those statements. That very effective, and I'm sure you and I can provide lots of examples
yeah.
on
So the
that as
chapter in the
well.
book is getting customers, and I think it's chapter 7. And it's I hate hand wavy stuff. You know that, right?
Yeah. Oh,
So it
gee, yeah.
specifically walks you through the precise questions to ask, the script. It tells you how the calls can go, and sometimes poorly. It assures you will never be able to ask all the questions in advance. It even walks through how to get people on your list to call to find out. It's the goal is that chapter is really meant to equip somebody to get it done without a workshop, without a client relationship. Just get it done.
Yeah.
Get it done. And
Great.
by the way, I should put it in perspective, Matt. The getting customers, the customer-driven acquisition model was really the basis for the book. It was meant to just be the one. That's what I was going to really write about. But it
Right.
turns out that the steps leading up to it, your self-assessment, your market validation, your product validation, even the idea of thresholds of when to quit, are all decisions that are best made before you start doing customer-driven acquisition.
Mm-hmm.
The whole title, Backward Entrepreneur, is that you do that first. You talk to your customers before you make your product.
Yeah.
And you say, if I was to offer this, what budget would you take from to buy it?
Mm-hmm.
Not would you buy it, because they'll always say yes, right?
Right.
In fact, some of my current entrepreneur ideas that I have for the next startup. And so far, I have not been able to get customers to give a positive monetization statement. They
Yeah.
all say it's greatest idea since anything. It's great. Congratulations. It's innovative. All the compliments. That's very nice. But when I
Yep.
say, what budget would you take from? They stumble.
Yes.
And without that, I'm not doing the startup, Matt.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
It's a dead blow tamper with a patent. It's the coolest thing in the world, but
Yeah.
nobody's going to pay for it. I'm not going to put my family savings into it.
No.
And that's really the methodology, and the reason that it's in there is to validate ahead of time whether or not this is going to pay off.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey everyone, this is Matt, and thanks for listening. Just a quick break in the middle of the podcast here to let you know there's a couple ways that you can connect with us. The first is learn.sitelogic.com. That's the learning site where you can see courses on analytics, courses on digital marketing across paid search, SEO, multiple disciplines. And then also, you can connect with us on Slack. Go to Slack if you're there and look for us at endlesscoffeecup.slack.com. Connect with us. I'd love to hear from you. Hear what ails you in the realm of digital marketing. Are there courses you need, information that you'd like to hear, or maybe some past guests that you'd like to hear more from? Thanks again for being a listener of the Endless Coffee Cup, and I look forward to hearing from you. Yeah. Well, and I wish more companies would actually focus on this. It's interesting. I think it's maybe more critical from an entrepreneurial standpoint because time and time again, when we go into companies and do analysis for them, I see where, great example, Threads came online. How much money and time did your company throw at Threads?
Yeah.
And but what gets them is when I ask them, where did that money come from? What budget did you steal from in
Yeah.
order to explore that? And
Yeah.
now, 2 months later, there's nothing there. Where did you steal that money from? And usually I can track down that you took it from somewhere that was a pretty good ROI. And
Yeah.
so you stole from yourself twice, moving
Yeah.
that money from something that was already established and working to we're going to try this out.
Yeah.
And you cut yourself twice
Yep.
in doing that. So it's a dangerous thing, but it's a great question you're asking. I'd be surprised if many companies even knew where they were taking money from when they do some things.
Yep. You speak truth.
Well, let's get to the next section. I mean, there's so much we could make this episode all about customer acquisition, but I do want to get to a couple other things about the book because, especially when we're talking about entrepreneurship, one of the biggest questions, and I think it's natural, is scale, is
Yeah.
growth. I remember an employee asking me once, "Are we ever going to get to the point where we have just enough customers?" and just enough work that we have some level of normalcy and my response is it will never be normal. I mean,
That's right. Yeah.
and the agency world is one of rapid expansion, rapid decline, and
Yeah.
I respect the agencies that don't want to do that and respect their workers because it's so easy to hire a dozen people and then turn around and let them go when the work's not there. So
Yeah.
scalability, that is a difficult step in an entrepreneur's life.
Yeah. And the chapter header is something like, if I can sell, 100 at a profit, why can't I sell 1 million?
Right, right.
And
Because if I just get
there's a
1%,
story.
if I get 1% of that 1,000,000.
Oh gosh, no, don't go there. Yeah, I want to boil the ocean.
Yeah.
So it's the boil the ocean. Like we should explain to your listeners what that means. Okay. One of the eye rolls, and Karen is really helping me with the eye rolls that I have, is when somebody says, it's such a big market. If I could get 1% of the market,
Yep.
and
Just a half a percent.
yeah, 0.5%. Yeah, it'd be worth $1 billion. And it's like, yeah, and it's like, as an exercise, I'd like you to go down. We're on the coast here. Go try to boil the ocean with a lighter. Because there is no get 1% of the market, okay, without incredible expense. But that's probably a topic for another podcast.
Yeah.
There's a short story I'm going to share that didn't make it into the book. It fell off the editing table. And when I think I was a product marketing manager at a very popular firm in Silicon Valley. And I think I was in my 20s. And I had an entrepreneurial attitude, and I had already, been at least second in command for some pretty big growth businesses. And so I brought that to this big company. It was one of the best companies to work for in the Bay Area. And as a product marketing manager, I had P&L responsibility for my product line. And I used some of the company's money. I think it was $70,000 or something like that on a campaign. And it gave a very good return. It brought in 700,000 of revenue or profit. I can't remember what, but anyway, it was good. And word came to me that I was called to the office of the executive vice president at the company. And I was gloating and thinking, this is going to be great. And so I went in and sat down. Actually, I'll share the name of the man who did this. His name is Wei Ting, W-E-I, I think, Wei Ting. And he very stern across this big desk in this big walnut office. And I'm thinking, here it comes, And Wei looked at me and he said, so you used $70,000 and you brought us 700,000. And I'm like, here it comes, the award, right? And he goes, I don't want you here. He goes, if you could do that, why did you not take 700,000 and bring us 7 million? He goes, you're not doing your job.
Wow.
He said, go take bigger risks and do your job. You know, and
Wow. I love it.
it changed the trajectory, right? It's
Right.
like,
Yeah.
he's like, if you can do that, you're wasting time, unless you use it with bigger numbers. Now, obviously, there's a lot of complications to that. And sometimes what works for 70,000 won't work for 700,000, but
Right.
it set it in the mind, right? Is there a process by which I can show that some small traction can be amplified into larger traction?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you take something away from this podcast in terms of scaling, that question, constantly asking, if I can sell this many for this much, what's in the way of me putting extra zeros after both of those numbers?
Yeah.
And it's a good test. But Matt, as we were talking earlier, one of the first questions I encourage people to ask when they're considering scaling is, why do you want to scale?
Yes.
Is it because that's what you were taught to do? Is it because that's what gets rewarded when you're at Thanksgiving dinners? Because sometimes it doesn't make sense. If your personal life suffers because you're scaling something, it's not worth it. Life's too short
Yeah.
to be chained to this image of scaling something. So, in the book, and I encourage people to write in the book, write on the pages, please. We'll print more. Okay. But I want to scale because, and finish the sentence.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I'm scaling when this occurs. And, if you can answer why you want to scale, and it's a positive, I want to scale because I'm motivated to do this, it fits my vision, then great. Then go through the rest of the chapter. In fact, we say that in there. It's like, if you don't pass this, you can read the rest of the chapter as an exercise, but you may want to go to the next one.
Right.
So the scaling process changes a lot of times, Matt, as you were talking about with agencies. Earlier in, the most important pillars of scaling seem to be three things: ideas, resourcefulness, and first customers. That's the focus, right? And that's okay. That's good. But as we really shift to second gear, I say that there are four pillars, okay? And that is vision, fuel, process, and talent. Okay? So vision, we know it's shorthand for our guiding principles, our mission, and other statements that keep us on track as we scale. That's important. We're humans, and that means that we're emotional creatures, as we were talking about before. And no matter how calculated we try to be, we can get distracted or affected by emotion. And our decisions can be inconsistent, they can be mercurial, or even counterproductive. So it's good to have that mission that can guide you through scaling. Fuel, we know that fuel is the capital required to bring in the talent, equipment, or partnerships that you need. And the most typical fuel sources are from your own sales, from loans, or funds raised through investments from outside sources. And
Yeah.
a lot of that's covered in the chapters. Reviewers have noted that I'm sort of anti-VC,
Yeah.
which is not quite true. I'm cautious VC,
Yes.
and quite honestly, not seasoned in terms of accepting VC funding. So I leave that to others, and I say so in the book. I don't thoroughly discourage people from it, but I do say, realize that it comes with a significant burden.
Yes.
Yep,
Absolutely.
it's true. So,
Well, you're giving up autonomy,
yes,
and now you have a whole new set of goals
yeah.
that are not yours. There's an
They
exchange.
could be.
Well,
They could
but
be.
there's always an exchange in
Yes.
scale.
Yeah.
If you want to scale, there are limited resources. And so you have, just like I was talking before about budgets, you're pulling from somewhere in order to get what you want. And I like your list of hours, market, resources, and products that I'm going to pull from one or all of these in some way in order to leverage growth. And what's the cost of that?
Yes.
Where will I pay? Because you will pay somewhere.
Yeah. And I mean, a good example is available hours. So my cousin is a physical therapist and has offices down in Monterey, California. And no bias, she's really good at what she does. She could scale her business by hiring a bunch of physical therapists and taking, I don't know, is it Medicare, Medicaid, whatever the, funding is for paying bills and insurance types, and churn people in and churn people out and do 20-minute appointments with half the appointment on stimulation, which is like electrocution that heals, I guess.
Right.
Okay, great. She doesn't want to do that. She wants to heal people. And so her business is highly limited by her available hours. So scalability in her vision, it wouldn't make it through the pre-flight checklist for your typical scaling of an office like that.
Right.
And it's intentional.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than struggle with the, I should be scaling at Thanksgiving dinner, how many patients are coming through your clinic, that's not the measurement that you accept.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have the available market? Are enough people buying copper that it makes sense to smelt copper,
Mm-hmm.
And there are attributes of certain products that lend themselves to scalability. Those are things like follow-on products, low variable cost, and high ticket. And those are described in the chapter. That is a good pre-flight checklist to go through before you decide to put your effort into scaling. So I'll touch on, I think we'll talk a little bit about exits after this, but there's two questions that have come up recently that I want to share how those go. And one of the most common questions I get when people are thinking about scaling, Matt, is when do I pay myself and how much?
Yes.
It's a good question and it's genuine. People are really...
It's genuine because it's painful.
Yeah. But my answer is a bit controversial. When somebody says, when do I pay myself and how much? My answer is pay yourself as much as you possibly can and as soon as you can, as long as it doesn't inhibit the growth of the company. Oh, well, that's a catchy phrase.
It is.
Right?
It is.
Because that means paying your employees fairly
Mm-hmm.
and sustaining the company with fuel, including yourself, right?
Yeah.
I mean, on one side, if you as a founder can't afford to build the business, then it's the death of the business, which hardly makes sense, right?
Right.
But if you're starving your employees, well, then it's not sustainable either. So, I mean, I have seen entrepreneurs suffer or even not pay themselves for many, many years. And then when they finally start making a profit, they felt guilty taking a big paycheck.
Mm.
And my advice to those in particular cases was you need to pay yourself obscenely well while you can.
Yeah.
As long as it doesn't inhibit the growth of the company.
Right.
Or create an unfair situation for others. You got a lot of back pay to make up for. And if the company can afford it, then do it.
And that is part of the fuel. I mean, you're the engine that's making this business happen. That you may have a good product, you may have these things, but ultimately you're the one driving this, and there is reward to it. That is a tough question, but I think it's one of those things that you are going to lose your motivation. You're going to lose your passion and your vision for it if you can't reward. That's the whole reason you did this. And so, it's very easy to, I think for some to get caught up with, I want to take care of my employees. I want to grow, they do some of the work and, maybe be a little more altruistic that I want to help more people. So I'm going to take less. That's not always the best route as well. But just that concept of this is kind of a zero sum and you've got to pull from somewhere to make these things happen.
Yeah. The second one, and then we can talk more about exits. The second one was that, and I mentioned this in the book. So I helped the client attract a new president. They kind of wanted to step back and let somebody else run things. And the new president came in on the promise of equity ownership. And one thing I do teach is do not give away equity. It needs to be earned over time.
Yes.
You could give away a percentage of the company. That person leaves the next day. Now you've given up. They're holding 10% of your company and they're not even involved. So you got to be careful about that. There's a whole bunch of creative ways to take care of that. So the new recruit was super excited and said, so what can I pay myself? Fair question. And the answer I helped the owner craft was something to the effect of, you can pay yourself whatever you want to pay yourself, as long as the company is profitable. Oh, and it's not more than the owner's pay. Oh, okay. And you could just see the furrowed brow as they're calculating, right?
Right.
And there are other limitations, like if there's zero margin, then it's minimal pay for the new president, right? Mm-hmm. Or fair pay for the employees couldn't be compromised.
Yeah.
So now this new president has to be careful about increasing his or her own pay because it would mean a 2 times hit on profit. And in this
Wow.
particular case, it took a little while for this to sink in. And the candidate for president, so if I come to the owner telling her she gets a raise, we all win. It's like, yep, more profit, more pay, no profit, minimal pay, incentives aligned, all partners succeed, right?
Love it. Love it.
So there's creative ways to do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I like that. I mean, it puts the incentives in the right place, and and the growth of the business. That is why you're here. That's so it's got to be commensurate with that. All right. We've got a few minutes to go here, Mike. And so, and exiting, we talked about a little bit at the top of the podcast about what's your goal for the business. But I think sometimes, and I even found myself in this realm as well, as I had spent 9 years building an agency, and it really just happened almost overnight, where it was, you know what? I'm not going to do this anymore. I want to go into teaching and training. And, I was done with the agency business. And fortunately, we worked very closely with another company, and it was just a natural thing. It was a leveraged asset buyout, and it worked so well. Essentially, I kind of became a salesperson on commission only. The employees were well taken care of. The clients, they still 10 years later have all, the clients. I couldn't have asked for a better situation, and it just worked out beautifully. But not everyone runs into that. And part of that is finding a buyer who's willing to pay what you want.
Yeah. And in a wealth of buyers, your value increases, supply and demand, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, one of the first things that I'll do with somebody who's thinking about exiting is we'll talk about why, whether it's personal timing, market timing, or investor timing, and any one of those is valid. Market timing is, I think the business has its peak value right now.
Mm-hmm.
Personal timing is, hey, this is a grind. I want to do other things.
Yeah.
Right. Investor timing, as your investors say, it's time, which is one of the issues with venture capital. But, obviously you want to make sure there's harmony among those. And then, like a vision, setting why you want to exit and what conditions you'll exit under as something that's written down really helps avoid those emotional swings, right?
Yes.
I will sell because of this only when I can get this exit, or only when I can assure that my employees will be taken care of, only when my investors get this return. And that helps keep us. So when we're getting a list of buyers, which is the next step that I encourage people to do, and start with a napkin sketch, we're going to list competitors. But here's where the list gets really interesting, is to create people who sell adjacent products or adjacent markets. Okay. So adjacent products might be a follow-on product to what I sell. So if I sell a garage door opener, maybe, I don't know what follows a garage door opener. It's like, what's an adjacent product? It might be, floor coverings for the garage, or cabinets or storage systems or something like that. Right.
Yeah.
And then adjacent markets might be, let's talk garage door openers, it might be home improvement products, right? Or in a channel of home improvement products. And then competitors. It's like, who else sells garage doors, right? Or garage door openers, and those, you can make a list like that. And then in the chapter, I don't think we have time here, but in the chapter, we talk about methods for communicating and making that balance between exposing the fact that you might be willing to sell to the possible detriment of the reputation of your company. And we walk through that. But I can give you one of the hints, one of the takeaways is prepare a statement in advance that's positive. If a nasty competitor decides to leak out that you're looking, you can put out a statement that says, yeah, we're looking to build this even more in partnership with a good partner. But if we don't, we will go on with your support.
Yeah.
Positive message. So,
Yes.
We kind of plug that hole, and the fear of something leaking out is now reduced because you have an answer for it.
Yep.
So now it loosens you up a little bit. You can make those phone calls that I've made in the past where somebody didn't know who I was. I just called and I said, hey, would you be interested in taking over this business?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, are you really Michael Stebbins? Yeah. You got to give them a second to sit there and go, this isn't a scam call. This is actually legitimate.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the other point that my heart really wants to share with people is the aspect of qualifying the buyers so you don't waste a bunch of time.
Mm-hmm.
And so obviously, if you're pursuing buyers, you could do a little less of this. You still want to make sure you're talking to the person who's going to sign the term sheet. Okay. And don't settle for not talking to that person at some point, because if they're not talking to you, then it is not a qualified buyer.
Yeah.
But there are 3 questions that I want to share with your audience that I like to ask to qualify buyers, because too often we get spray and pray, or somebody who just took a get rich quick course and they want to try and buy your business with equity in their imagined future merge business. And no, run away from them.
Yeah. Yes.
But the 3 questions, and I'm going to read these because I wrote them down here just for this audience. The first question is, this is for potential buyers. What businesses have you invested in that are similar to mine? And Matt, if they can't answer that, if they can't answer who they're looking at, and they don't know about your business, then they're probably not serious.
Yeah.
The second question I ask are, what are 2 acquisitions that you've made that didn't work out so well, or that failed before completion? If they can't answer that, they're probably not qualified, right? And then the last one is, what are the source of funds and approval chain for an acquisition like this? That last one, it's a deal killer if they're not ready.
Yeah.
And so I highly recommend that when you get a call or a voicemail or a email messages saying we're interested in buying companies like yours, those, call them back. I mean, vet them online, and if they're legit, call them back and run through those 3 questions, and you'll get a really clear sense as to whether they're qualified or not.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people that, like you said, they've got dreams, they've got ideas of how to do that. And whenever someone says creative financing, I cringe a little bit about that.
Yeah. Can I share one more?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. This one more, it's called a term sheet trick. And there's a definition of a term sheet in the book. You can look it up, but it's basically, it outlines what the terms of the deal are before you execute a binding agreement. And this term sheet trick has saved me so much. First off, I love and value attorneys. You're going to see that in the book over and over again. Get a good attorney to set up your business. Get them to advise you. But realize that attorneys are not deal makers. It is their job to scare you away from a deal with all the possible horrible things that can happen.
Right.
So to take control of your deal, here's a process that has worked phenomenally well for my clients and for myself. Grab another term sheet, either one of yours from the past or one from somebody else, or grab one online, okay, and use that as a script in a live one-on-one call with the deal maker on the other side, not their attorney. Go through each of the items in this model term sheet and come to agreement on what you'd like to do for each one of those. Consideration, payment time, equity, all of these things, deal timing, breakup fees, all those kinds of things. Come to verbal agreement and write your own script together as the rules for your attorneys.
Yes.
So when you take that, you've already come to mostly material agreement with your buyer. And now you are both giving the same sheet of music to your attorneys to execute. Now, will your attorneys maybe reveal something that isn't going to work out in your benefit? Yeah. Okay. But it becomes the exception, right?
Yeah.
I'm telling you, you do that trick, it will streamline your deal and help it close much faster. So hopefully that's valuable.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what happened with, in my case, was absolutely, we agreed on all the terms first, and then it was just framework. Everything was in line. It made the process so much smoother. But yeah, just to remind people, if you're having an accountant or an attorney review this, their job is to find the problem. It's not to pat you on the back, tell you you're doing great. It's if they're working in your best interest, they will scare you. They will tell you. And even myself, looking at an acquisition at one time, when my accountant came back and said, "No, run away. I'm like, but
Yeah.
and it's our nature is, oh, but I could double my business. I could,
Yeah.
but when you have an accountant saying like, no, it's a shadow. It's not there.
Yep. Yeah.
That's what you need at that point is people telling you, bringing you back down to earth that
Yeah.
here's the reality and you're still looking at things,
Yes.
with the rose colored glasses. You need to get those off.
And on a positive note, the same principles that we talked about for customer driven acquisition can work in closing up a deal. When you're working with private equity and there's 7 decision makers all involved, almost always you're going to have one person on the buyer side who's pretty obstinate and is negative, 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 and I don't want to do this. And, taking that person aside and spending some time and just saying, what do you really want to have happen in this deal?
Yeah.
Can be really revealing. First off, it validates them,
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
um,
absolutely.
and second off, they might tell you something that's actually material. It's like, I hadn't thought of that. We need to
Yes.
address this,
Right.
right? But also, I mean, Matt, there's one situation where a product ended up getting named after the person's family, and that closed the deal.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing as a sales process that you pointed out. What's in it for them? Obviously, you don't want to breach, anti-kickback or do something, fraudulent or wrong or misrepresentation. But, sometimes it's a way to work through a naysayer by learning exactly what it is that you need to do or say for them
Yeah.
to make the business deal happen. And that ends it on a real positive note.
Absolutely. Love it, Mike. Love it. I have got to tell you, dear listener, if you are a business owner, if you are thinking about being an entrepreneur, pick up this book. The amount of information in here, I even read it as, I call myself, I'm a 3-time entrepreneur and I was still, and I've known Mike for years, but some of those stories I've heard, but still to see it, the frameworks, invaluable stuff. You can't get enough coaching when you are, working on your own business. So,
Yeah,
Mike,
or
thank you.
validating what you're already doing. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
lot of folks a lot of the LinkedIn messages that I'm getting, Matt, are like, they start with dude, which I always love that.
Yeah, right.
You named my favorite band. But aside from that, you
Yes.
validated what I'm doing, and now I have more confidence
Absolutely.
to surge ahead. And I'm like, it makes me feel so good to get those. So
That's
if you're
good.
a reader, by the way, send that in. I love those. Fuel for the next one.
Well, we'll put all your contact information on the show page. So, listener, if you'd like to contact Mike, I highly recommend connecting on LinkedIn. Learn more about Mike's giving away free wisdom. So, take advantage of it. Mike, thank you so much for making time to be on the show. I really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Yep.
All right. And dear listener, as always, we've got the show page. There's going to be a lot of resources there from this show. So I highly recommend you go there and check them out. And as always, I look forward to our next coffee and conversation on the Endless Coffee Cup podcast. Have a great day. You've been listening to the Endless Coffee Cup. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with somebody else. And of course, please take just a moment and rate or review us at your favorite podcast service. If you need more information, contact me at sitelogicmarketing.com. Thanks again for being such a great listener.